All right, welcome. So, dopamine's role in addiction. So, for any of you guys who have addictions, who are addicted to things, or who have been addicted to things, right? It turns out that more often than not, dopamine is actually the cause of the addiction, not the substance itself, not the activity itself, but dopamine, right? And dopamine isn't a bad thing either. But when misused, mistreated, and the dopamine system is abused, right? When the reward system is overworked, overused, and abused, what ends up happening is that we become addicted to these chemicals, right? We become addicted to these neurochemicals and neurotransmitters. And actually, so dopamine is actually a neuromodulator, not a neurotransmitter. But we become addicted to these chemicals within the brain instead of life itself, right? Because life is what typically allows us to experience these fluctuations, right? These highs and lows. But when we become addicted to the chemicals in the brain themselves, right, this causes essentially a need for stimulation, a need for pleasure, a need for something to make you feel good instead of being able to just feel good in yourself, right? Within your own body and within your own mind, right? So for anybody who is looking to maximize their progress on self-improvement and learn more about self-improvement, you can go ahead and click that first link in the description to join my community, Self-Improvement Synthesized, where I help athletes and entrepreneurs create the perfect daily routine so they can optimize their progress and make the most progress possible, right? I'm also doing one-on-one coaching. So if you guys would like to check out that is the second link in the description. And you can also DM me on Instagram if you'd like to have a conversation with me about it first, because obviously we need to see if you're a good fit for my program before we get into anything. So you could go ahead and book a call. We'll have a discussion, or you can go and we'll have a discussion over on Instagram. You can DM me there. But when I was younger, I'd say 14, 15. And actually, we can go back way earlier. We could go back to when I was 10, 11, 12. But when I was younger, I always had a need for something, right? It was never a specific thing, but there was always the one thing or the two things, right? There was always something, right? There was always something that my mind couldn't go without or couldn't go without thinking about, right? I was always dead focused on whether it was video games, whether it was junk food. Eventually it became weed, right? Porn, all the basic addictions, social media, TikTok, right? There was always something, right? And it started originally with food. And as it turns out, this is both a result of and likely a cause of what I'm dealing with now, which is celiac and having to adjust my diet based on that. But back when I was younger, I was very addicted to what I now see as gluten, but back then it was just stimulating food, right? It was just whatever tasted good to me, right? It needed to be tasty. But what ended up happening was my taste buds became used to overstimulating food. It became used to McDonald's. It became used to candy and sugar, right? And then it transitioned and it became video games. Right? When I started playing video games, I was obsessed with video games, right? I played them all day long as much as I could. And then when I was at school, I noticed I wouldn't even focus on the work. I would just think about video games. I was thinking about, I used to play Ark, right? Ark Survival, right? I would think about the base that I want to build when I get home, right? And I didn't play Ark for very long, but when I was playing, that's what I would think about. And then I was playing Fortnite because all of my friends started playing Fortnite, right? And then I was only thinking about that. Or I was thinking about, like, when I go home, the bowl of ramen noodles or whatever the fuck shitty food I was going to eat. So at that time, it was a little bit of both. But then as I got older, I turned 14, and I became addicted to weed instead, right? And again, it started out just a normal thing. I just did it once, and then all of a sudden, I felt this insane, intense, not even craving for it, but just a desire for it. Like, I just wanted it. I just wanted to do it. I wanted to do it all the time. And now, with my understanding of dopamine, with my understanding of addiction, what I found is that it isn't an addiction to the substances themselves, right? It isn't an addiction to junk food or sugar or video games. it's an addiction to dopamine. That's why it would always progress, right? Because that addiction never went anywhere, but it would switch what I got that dopamine from, right? And what ended up happening was, as soon as I started smoking weed, I stopped playing video games, right? And I went over and I started smoking weed instead, because that was my new source of dopamine, right? And now my source of dopamine is sports, exercise, books, work, right? Making YouTube content. So I have a different source of dopamine, right? Which allows me to no longer need these things that were addictions, that felt like something I needed back then, right? So I've changed my desire, right? Without removing anything, without changing anything about myself, I just switched where I got my dopamine from. And therefore I switched what I desire most, which now is actually work, which now is exercise, right? Which is books and learning, right? These are the things that now give me stimulation. Whereas before, it was all of the addictive substances, addictive habits and patterns. And now it's work and it's exercise, right? And the only thing that I did was switch where I got my source of dopamine from, right? Because one thing that people try to do, and I see a lot in the dopamine detox culture, and I myself even tried to do this, but you just remove all the shit, right? You remove all the bad shit, but if you don't put anything in its place, you will always revert back, because your brain is seeking that next hit of dopamine. And so if you don't give it another source of dopamine, it won't know what else to do with itself but revert back. It will be extremely painful and extremely difficult to quit, and you'll likely revert back, right? And even then, if you push through the pain and you're successful in quitting, you're only successful because eventually you will be forced to find a new outlet. You'll be forced to find a new source of dopamine, right? And so we can make this process a lot quicker. We can make this process a lot quicker and a lot faster, and also a lot more seamless and effortless and easy, right? Less painful by simply consciously switching our source of dopamine. So the first section I have is titled Dopamine, the Molecule of More. And some of you guys will know this book. I stole that from a book, right? That's the title of a book, is The Molecule of More. But it's a perfect encapsulation of what dopamine is, right? It is the molecule that initiates a desire for more, right? Dopamine itself initiates the desire to create something or attain something outside of ourselves that we don't already have access to, right? So, for example, I don't have dopamine from sitting here and recording this video. In fact, it's more serotonin, right? Serotonin is the chemical for satisfaction, right? I'm very satisfied and I'm also very focused, so there's probably a little bit of cortisol as well, right? But for the most part, it's more serotonin and cortisol, right? To keep my attention high and my satisfaction as well, right? As well as like endorphins are probably floating around up there because they just worked out. But it's not dopamine, right? But dopamine is what will eventually drive me to press record again. Because dopamine is the molecule of desire, of motivation, right? It is the chemical released in our brain to initiate the process of creating something, right? And so back to my example, right? I don't get dopamine from working, but I will get a dopamine spike after working because of the nature of delaying gratification, right? I don't get a dopamine spike before, but after. But the dopamine spike is what will motivate me to continue to move forward and continue to make progress, right? It is not the release it's not the chemical released in order to give me a sense of pleasure or a sense of satisfaction. In fact, it's the opposite, right? It's a sense of dissatisfaction with my current state, right? So right now, I don't have to do or change anything to continue creating this video. That's why it's not dopamine. But to create a whole new video, I will, because it is something outside of myself. It is something not currently within my immediate grasp, right? Within my immediate situation, right? Dopamine is what moves us to attain something outside of ourselves, right? So the attainment here is either, I could say, the goal itself or the result, right? So it's either the result of making a YouTube video, creating a YouTube video, that piece of content is the result, Or you could say the result of 10,000 subscribers, both of which are driven by dopamine. But working itself, sitting here and doing the work, isn't driven by dopamine, right? My motivation to work, my desire to work is driven by dopamine. Does this make sense? And obviously any questions, you guys can comment down below and I'll help you guys out. But if you can understand what I'm trying to get at, dopamine itself is just simply responsible for motivation, not satisfaction, not actually receiving the thing. That is a different set of neurotransmitters and chemicals within the brain. But when you first decide on a goal, or you first create a desire for something, to go and attain something, to go and set a goal and create something new, what happens is dopamine is released in the brain, right? And this drives you to taking action. This is what drives you to take action. So the dopamine itself is what drives you to take action. It makes you feel motivated, and it makes you feel excited, and it makes you feel the desire, the internal desire to do the thing, right? Whether that's work or that's a drug or whatever other activity you're addicted to, right? Whether that's an addictive habit or it's work, right? One or the other. It is the drive, it is the motivation to do it. So it influences addiction by causing the craving. It is the craving. Dopamine itself is the craving. But the beauty of this is that we can actually use this to our advantage by, when we feel the craving, when we feel the desire to do the negative thing, if we do something else, right, this actually gives us another spike of dopamine. And this increases our overall baseline of dopamine. And so what that does is allows you to desire more difficult things, right? The more dopamine we have, the more desire, the more motivation we have, right? And so if we build it up by doing the right things, then we can transform our lives. We can be happy, healthy, and feel amazing, right? But every time we do one of the negative habits, our dopamine actually drops, right? Think of social media. When you get a spike of dopamine from social media, which is this spike and increase in desire to continue doing the thing or to do the thing in the first place. But then after the fact, you get a dip and it goes below baseline. And so now your baseline is actually lowered, which leaves you with less motivation and less desire to do the things you actually need to do. And instead, you end up distracted, right? You end up drifting. You end up feeling this sense of dread, right? When it comes to work, when it comes to just living, right? Getting off the couch for some people feels like a big task. And that's because they're in a dopamine hole, right? They have lowered their baseline so far that basic activities are too much for them to handle, right? It is so painful almost to do these simple activities because there's no dopamine in your brain, right? There's no desire to do something. There's no desire to reach for something new. So even if it means walk into the kitchen and getting something from the fridge, you don't have that motivation to get up and do it anyways, right? So the imbalanced system. So when we receive dopamine spikes, when we do something like social media, a drug, watch porn, this spikes our dopamine, right? Because we have this increase in desire, we have this increase in craving, right? And it's also dopamine that leads us up to the activity, right? It is dopamine that has you thinking about the thing, right? That has you craving the thing. And then once you are about to get it, I believe this is when we get the spike, but when you're about to get the thing, right when you're about to get the thing, dopamine spikes. Dopamine has a huge increase. And then after the thing is done, after you have done the thing, then it drops and it goes back down below baseline, right? And so what this means is over time doing these negative habits, your baseline of dopamine continues to get lower and lower and lower. And eventually, think about it like this. This is the baseline to be able to work, right? And you start at baseline, you go all the way up, and you go down. You're right here. You're right below baseline. You're right below the level of desire that you need to work. Now think about what would happen if you were to do that continuously over an extended period of time, right? It's going to go down, 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 down. And eventually this is just a basic task, right? This is just writing a script, or I don't know. I don't do any other businesses, but it could be whatever, basic tasks, right? Basic work tasks. This could be doing the dishes, right? Doing the dishes seems like such a big and dreadful task because your dopamine is so low, right? Your level of motivation is so low, right? And this is all due to the addictive vices that you have, right? These huge increases in dopamine that are unnatural, right? That aren't meant to be, because you aren't working, right? You aren't putting an effort in order to create this state, right? You're just receiving it because of something that was programmed, right? Like an app that was just programmed to give you constant dopamine spikes, or a manufactured drug, right? A synthetic drug that wasn't meant to be in the world, or synthetic food that also wasn't meant to be in the world, unnatural food that wasn't meant to be, right? But it was made to be more stimulating, right? And this creates this dopamine imbalance, right? This creates this this lowered baseline, right? Where we are too low to actually go and achieve something real within the world, right? Too depressed, and yes, this is the feeling of depression, right? This is where that feeling comes from. It's from a deficit, a dopamine deficit. But we get this feeling of depression and dread when it comes to putting in effort, right? But for someone like me, and again, I'm not special, right? For someone in my state of being, you could even say, right? For someone like me, it feels pleasurable to work, right? I want to work. I love to work. I love to do things, right? And that, obviously, testosterone plays into that as well. But the main thing is dopamine, right? Because I've mastered dopamine and my dopamine spikes. I haven't been on my phone for anything other than work today. Yeah, no, I haven't. I think I texted my girl once, and I responded to my dad asking what I was doing. And other than that, I haven't been on my phone. I haven't done anything that is going to stimulate me more than work itself, right? The most stimulating thing I've done so far is record this video, right? So that means it's easy and it's almost pleasurable for me to sit here and do the work. Obviously, it's still work, still takes effort, still takes me reminding myself to focus back on the task at hand, but it's easy. And I do it. Why? Because it feels good to achieve things, right? It feels good to go out and actually do work and achieve something and create something better than what is currently in front of me, than what I currently have access to, right? And this is driven by dopamine itself. And without that balance and baseline of dopamine that allows you to work, right, an even baseline. And in fact, the cool thing is, the more you work, the higher your baseline goes, right? So work for me is right here. I'm probably like right around here. I'm not quite way above it, but I'm probably like right here, just chilling right above it. And so it feels easy for me to work because my baseline is a little bit higher. And so the result of all of that, right? So the result of continuously lowering your baseline is that you become less motivated, you have less desire, and work becomes a lot harder, right? And so your brain resists it more, and your brain becomes more addicted to the very thing that got it to the state in the first place, right? Because that's what it needs in order to get this increase in dopamine to return back at least close to baseline, right? Its goal is to go above baseline because that is the nature of addictive habits, but it is looking to at least reach this baseline. And the only thing that can do that immediately is these same drugs, these same vices, all of it, right? But again, immediate gratification and immediate pleasure always results in long-term pain and suffering, right? And so the delayed gratification version of this is slowly building your baseline back up naturally to where it will sustain its level through doing the hard work, through lowering your baseline in the moment so that it can be increased in the long term. And what happens when you are constantly giving into these addictive vices and constantly draining your dopamine and lowering your baseline is you as a person become more depressed. You as a person become less motivated. You as a person lower your own expectations and standards for yourself, lower your own goals because you no longer desire to go out and get these big goals, right? You no longer desire to go out and put in this effort to create something new, You're happy and content and satisfied with where you are because your baseline of dopamine is so low. And so how to heal, right? What's the way that you can actually heal? You have to replace the activity is the first step. You always have to look at the activity that's causing this, right? So based off of what I've just explained, based off of what you've just learned about dopamine and how it works and how it operates and how these addictive vices operate, determine what the biggest thing is for you that is currently lowering your baseline, right? That is currently causing you to have less desire, less motivation, less reason to push through, right? What is the activity that's causing this is what I'm getting at, right? So if it's junk food, if it's social media, if it's a drug, identify that, right? And then replace it. Don't remove the activity, replace the activity. So one example I give is if it's a social media addiction, the best and easiest fix for that is your addiction is to information, right? Your addiction is to taking in information when it comes to social media. So what can you replace this with? Instead of watching short form content, instead of watching like brain rot, shitty YouTube videos, like just dumb shit, watch educational long form content, right? Like this, or preferably an hour to an hour and a half to 2 hours long, right? Where you are really learning like really valuable information, right? And that's one example, but that's a good replacement activity for specifically social media, right? Or a book. A book is even better, right? A book is another step in the right direction, but ideally you switch from brain rot to education, and then from short form education to long form education, and then from long form education to full courses to books, right? So on and so forth. Because what we're doing is we're increasing your attention span slowly, as well as your ability to give attention to lower stimulating things, because the videos and the content you're watching is extremely stimulating. That's why it's a problem. So we reduce the stimulation and allow you to regulate your system back to being able to enjoy, let's say, shorter educational videos, right? Being able to pay attention to this type of content. Then maybe long form educational content, right? Being able to sustain this attention for a long period of time, right? And this increases our ability to have a reasonable baseline of dopamine, because it's harder to give your attention to educational content than it is to give your attention to stimulating short form pieces of content. The next thing is cold showers, because cold showers will actually increase your dopamine. I believe it's by about 200% for up to 6 hours. I believe. I could be completely wrong about the numbers there, but basically you get an increase of dopamine and a very drastic increase in dopamine, and that dopamine is sustained through the majority of the day, right? And then what you could do is you could go and work out, you could go and do some work, you could go and read a book and do some of these other lower stimulating activities that will actually increase your baseline, so that you can use this dopamine and this motivation you have to do the hard things that you have to do to then increase your baseline of dopamine after those activities are done. And then so rest/time away from overstimulation. You need to rest your brain, you need to rest your mind, you need to rest you need to relax and take time away from these activities that are overstimulating you. And specifically social media, specifically overstimulation, this is what we'd like to move away from, right? Take time where we're just relaxing and resting and sitting in silence, sitting with ourselves, right? Even just have a little conversation with yourself, right? In a journal, right? Take time away from the overstimulation so that you can actually regulate your brain, regulate your dopamine system again, and actually start to receive more pleasure from doing things. So that's all I have for you guys. And if you guys are interested in more self-improvement content, you can go ahead and click the subscribe button there. You can also go down and check out my paid products, right? My coaching, and top link is self-improvement synthesized. So you guys can go and look at those. But other than that, I am out of here. Peace.